We often think of history as this grand story, all about famous names and huge epic battles. But what if I told you that some of the biggest turning points in history came down to people we've pretty much completely forgotten? Today, we're going to uncover the story of one of those founders, a guy whose single vote changed the entire course of America. Check out this quote. In 1786, a really frustrated Thomas Jefferson wrote, "The voice of a single individual would have prevented this abominable crime." He was talking about a vote that had been lost a couple of years earlier, a vote he was convinced could have changed everything for the better. So that's the big question, right? Who was this person? And what exactly was this abominable crime that his one vote allowed to go forward? Well, that's the historical mystery we're going to solve right now. To really get what was at stake, we've got to go back to 1784. The Revolutionary War has just ended, and the brand new United States is trying to figure out what to do with all this new Western land. Thomas Jefferson, who's in the Continental Congress at the time, comes up with this truly radical idea. He proposes to ban slavery in all new states that would be carved out of these territories after the year 1800. I mean, think about that. It could have kept slavery contained to just the original southern states, maybe even setting it on a path to die out completely. It was a massive proposal, and it failed. But what's so wild is how it failed. It wasn't some huge blowout. See, under the rules they had back then, you needed 7 states to vote yes for it to pass. They got 6. The 7th vote they needed was from New Jersey, but one of their delegates was sick that day and couldn't vote, so the state couldn't cast its ballot. One person's absence changed everything. As Jefferson himself put it, the clause was lost by an individual vote only. So who was behind this? Well, the actual motion to kill Jefferson's anti-slavery clause was made by one delegate and seconded by his colleague from South Carolina, a man named Jacob Reed. By jumping in to second that motion, Reed basically put himself at the forefront of the opposition. His vote was absolutely key in making sure the ban failed, which makes him the central figure in this whole pivotal moment. But Jacob Reed was way more than just a name on a voting sheet, so let's get to know the man behind the vote. He was a patriot, a politician, and even a prisoner of war. This guy was no small fry, not at all. He was born into a big-shot South Carolina family. He went all the way to London to study law, and he was a patriot to the core. During the Revolution, he was actually captured by the British and held as a prisoner of war. The minute he got out, he was elected to the Continental Congress. So yeah, he was a well-known, totally respected leader. Let's be clear, he was a serious player. As a lawyer, a plantation owner, and a politician, Jacob Reed was deeply plugged into the elite world of Charleston. He was a powerful voice in his state and on the national stage. He was even Speaker of the South Carolina House for 5 years. This was exactly the kind of guy whose decisions carried a ton of weight. But here's where it gets really interesting. That 1784 slavery vote, it wasn't a one-off. It turns out this was kind of a pattern for Reed. His career was marked by taking these incredibly controversial, high-stakes positions. In fact, about a decade later, he'd cast another deciding vote that would once again put him right in the middle of a national firestorm. Now, to get this next big moment, we got to talk about something called the Jay Treaty. Basically, in 1795, this was a deal hammered out to fix all the lingering problems with Great Britain after the war. But for a lot of Americans, it just felt like a total betrayal, like they were giving in to their old enemy. People hated it. It was incredibly unpopular. And you can see this crazy parallel forming, right? In '84, the issue is slavery expanding west, and his move helps kill the ban. Then, in '95, the issue is this hated treaty with Britain. And what does he do? As a U.S. senator, he casts the one crucial vote needed to get it ratified. In both situations, his single vote had this massive nation-changing impact. And the backlash to that Jay Treaty vote? Oh, it was personal and it was ugly. A mob in his own hometown of Charleston was so furious, they actually hung a dummy of him in the street and even threatened his house. So this was a guy who was willing to go against what everyone wanted, even when it put him in real danger. But this knack he had for being at the center of huge political fights, well, it would eventually come back to bite him. His career ends with him becoming what was known as a midnight judge, a story that really shows him becoming a victim of the same partisan battles he'd fought in for so long. So what on earth is a midnight judge? Well, the name kind of says it all. Picture this. It's the final hours of President John Adams's time in office in 1801. Adams, a Federalist, just like Reed, is about to hand power over to his biggest rival, Thomas Jefferson. So in a last-ditch move, Adams starts appointing a whole bunch of judges at the very last minute to keep his party's influence alive. And the way this all played out for Reed is, well, it's almost comical. First, Adams appoints him to be a federal judge. But then, in this weird political chain reaction, another guy who was supposed to get a promotion turns it down, which means the seat Reed was supposed to fill was never actually empty. And before they can even sort that mess out, Jefferson becomes president, and his party immediately gets rid of the very law that created those jobs in the first place, completely wiping out Reed's appointment. And just like that, his judicial career was over before it even started. So all of this leaves us with this really complicated and honestly almost completely forgotten legacy. How are we supposed to make sense of a guy like Jacob Reed? Let's just lay all the pieces out. On one hand, you've got a certified Revolutionary War hero, a respected politician. But on the other hand, this is the same man whose vote helped clear the way for slavery to expand. He cast a vote that may have avoided another war with Britain, but it made him a total villain in his own state. And in the end, his whole long career just fizzled out, a victim of political games. So really, the big takeaway here is this. Jacob Reed isn't a name you hear alongside Jefferson or Adams, but his personal choices have this absolutely gigantic, outsized impact on the direction the United States would go. His story is just this powerful reminder that history isn't always shaped by the most famous people, but sometimes by one person making one choice at exactly the right or wrong moment. And that kind of leaves us with one last thing to think about. If one man's vote could have such a deep and lasting effect on the country, how many other forgotten founders are out there? How many other people made one single choice that, for better or worse, ended up defining the world we all live in today?